So now that we have officially seen the last of tennis in 2021 upon the conclusion of the 2021 Abu Dhabi tournament held in mid-December, there's just one last topic I want to touch on and I feel deserves some recognition before I start going into recapping the year and recapping seasons for individual players, and that particular topic was only embellished at that Abu Dhabi exhibition. The final saw Andrei Rublev take on Andy Murray, and it was a tightly contested match. Rublev came out in tight straights on top, but it was the latter in Andy Murray which was what really caught my eye. Obviously, Abu Dhabi is an exhibition, but unlike most other exhibitions, the players do give a decent amount of effort. It's usually just a nice venue to get some reps in and shake off a little bit of rust because of the timing at which the tournament is held. And so through Andy Murray's 3 matches there, it included a very, very sharp performance against Dan Evans. He dismissed him pretty routinely, and albeit against a pretty rusty Rafa Nadal, continued that type of form in that match and was able to get over the hump in a tight straight setter where pretty much throughout he had the upper hand and looked decidedly the better player. And to finish, as I mentioned earlier, put in a pretty good showing against a guy in Andrei Rublev who's become a pretty solid fixture in the top 10 for the last 2 years, and that continued the trend of Andy Murray playing the best tennis he has since that metal hip surgery, ever since the end of Wimbledon. If you've gotten the chance to see Murray ever since he lost to Shapovalov at Wimbledon, chances are you've probably seen some drastic improvement out of the guy. You know, he showed glimpses of play like this at the end of 2019, the first year when he came back with the metal hip. But then after that, save really Cincinnati last year, Murray had really become a bit of a non-factor. And as awesome as it was to see him back at center court, the venue where he's had his greatest moments and got to rev up that British crowd yet again in a few of those matches he won, particularly that 5-setter he came back in against Oscar Ota. As great as that was to see, his play clearly wasn't where he wanted it to be, and throughout this metal hip Murray era, Andy has always been pretty insistent that he still thinks he has plenty of juice left in the tank and that he can still play with the big dogs and play at the highest of levels. However, following that Wimbledon defeat where he was really blown off the court at the hands of Shapovalov, and having suffered a couple of niggling injuries throughout the beginning of the year, Murray seemed to be at a crossroads, and I believe he even said something along the lines of whether he felt it was worth it putting in all this work and going through all the hardships that he has to get back to even playing tennis. Was it still worth it? Because as far as the tennis was concerned, as far as the results were concerned, the reality was that at that point, those self-critiques were very valid. Ever since his hip resurfacing surgery, he showed some flashes at the end of 2019 through the Asian swing, as well as picking up a title in Antwerp, miraculously so at that. But aside from that, yeah, he'd beaten Zverev at Cincinnati, but the results had been very mediocre, and in his own estimation, pretty much, he'd had nothing to show for still putting himself through the grit and grind of what being a pro athlete requires, even after all his ailments. But I would say that changed following Wimbledon. Had to be a gut punch and very frustrating for him to sustain a quad injury to force him out of the singles at the Olympics, where he was a 2-time defending Olympic gold medalist. But immediately in his return in Cincinnati, and he looked pretty decent in a loss, albeit to Hubert Hurkacz in his second match there, and that kind of became a trend over the second half of the year, the duration of which I'm covering in this video. Murray would win one, maybe two matches before running into a real massive hurdle, especially rankings-wise. That would happen countless times over this span, and really that is the reason for his record in this span, where I feel he's playing his best tennis of the Metal Hip Murray era. Doesn't really reflect that at all. For all the praise I'm about to give him, he only finished 11-10 in this span, and it very well could lead to people who hadn't watched the matches or didn't know any better to say nothing's really changed. But in those 21 matches, you will see that he really didn't have that many bad losses through the second half of the year. He was almost always competitive, and nearly all the losses came to guys that he would be a huge underdog against. And even in a couple of those matches with the odds stacked against him, at the end of the year, he was able to rack off a couple of wins in those, and even got a couple of top 10 wins in there against Hurkacz and Jannik Sinner. But what stood out even more were in a couple of those losses. Obviously, the one that really woke us up was that 5-setter he played against Tsitsipas in the first round at the US Open. After that draw released, that was a really hot matchup that was anticipated, primarily because of the weight that Andy Murray's name will always hold in tennis. But, I mean, we'd seen something like this last year when he was drawn Wawrinka in the first round of the French and he was blown off the court. Albeit, he was already playing better, but I don't think many people really made much of that matchup and expected it to be pretty routine for Steph. Now, albeit Tsitsipas wasn't 100% down the stretch this year, especially towards the end, and I would say that US Open was included in that, and this match's legacy may well have been the toilet breaks and how controversial it was with how it seemed like Tsitsipas was stalling. But as far as the match itself was concerned, you could make a very good case Murray should have won the match. Had a very good opportunity to go up 2-0, and he definitely just held his own throughout. Same sort of thing happened in Indian Wells when he drew Alexander Zverev, and these are guys who are now, after this year, considered to be in that premier tier. Yeah, he was able to get some wins over guys like Hurkacz, Sinner, Alcaraz. Very, very impressive wins, don't get me wrong, but Tsitsipas and Zverev are another weight class at this point in time, and Murray held his own tremendously in both of these matches. I believe in this second match I'm referring to in Indian Wells against Sasha, he was up a break in both sets. And particularly in the second set of this Indian Wells match, it seemed like Murray really started going after his forehand more. And I do hope that's something we see into the future for the rest of his career, because for the most part, if you've watched Andy Murray since his comeback from this major hip injury, he really hasn't done all that much to change his game. It's a lot of the same falling back on fitness that isn't near where it used to be, as well as probing with all the craftiness he wields as far as variety in his game. But beginning with Indian Wells, it did seem like he was at least trying to make an effort at going outside his comfort zone and being more aggressive with his forehand. And it was those matches that were real eye-openers to me. It really felt like down the stretch of this year, any given day, Andy could bring out top-tier tennis. I would go as far as to say top 10 level. And yet, what's so tough about it is that his ranking really did not experience that much of a boost as a result. He really didn't yield any of the rewards that his play should have. And that's mainly just because where he's stuck at in the rankings at the moment, it's going to be a tough climb back up, especially because being that low, it's so much more likely that he's going to be drawn a lot of very difficult opponents very early on. But towards the end of this year,
you did begin to see that he's still capable of navigating those obstacles. And dare I say, I'm cautiously optimistic on what Murray can do going forward into 2022. At the end of the day, of course, it's going to depend a lot on health. And as we've experienced in the Metal Hip Murray era, that's definitely not a sure thing. But as far as the question that he posed back at Wimbledon of whether it was worth it for all the good work he's doing, I would say he's finally seeing some of the rewards for all he's done to try to get back. And tentatively, I'm gonna say I could very well see him getting back to the top 50 next year, and I'm honestly very comfortable saying that. Going out on a limb for me would be I could see him seated at slams again. I could see him back as a top 30 player, because his level was legitimately like top 20-ish in some of these matches where he was a heavy underdog throughout the second half of this season. Of course, it's also entirely possible that he keeps falling just short while fighting the good fight as he always has, considering how the odds are stacked quite heavily against him as far as health coupled with having to build up that ranking again. But I just think it's awesome to see Andy Murray playing at any semblance of a high level, which he certainly did through the latter half of this season. And yeah, it's almost time to put the bow on 2021. Obviously very excited as the 2022 season draws nearer. I have my work cut out for me as far as season reviews and previews. Stay tuned for that. But that is wraps on this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If so, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you guys again for watching. I appreciate it. Happy holidays, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.